Thanks for that. I remember Dilpreet and I had spoken about this work when she was still imagining the physicality of it, and it's very, very beautiful today to be here and see the work in person in its one of its iterations, and which I think we'll discuss, as we get into the conversation. Before we begin, I actually wanted to share some takeaways that I had from the works. And I just wanted to read out this little piece that I wrote for it. While looking at these abstract remnants of lives lived and journeys undertaken in the stories told to Dilpreet, I often wondered about the use of the cyanotype for image making. Does the removal from the literal in this work bring me closer to the voices that I cannot see? I was left thinking of the blue ink that remains deeply embedded into the fibers of the paper. The blue of distance, as Rebecca Solnit describes in her essay by the same name. In her ruminations on the color blue, as the light that got lost, she presents it with an identity, a landscape that is alive and breathing, and yet one that begins to obfuscate its identity when it's lost in the murkiness of its horizon. She describes blue in these words, and I'd just like to read out a small sentence that Rebecca Solnit wrote. The color of that distance is the color of an emotion, the color of solitude and of desire, the color of there seen from here, the color of where you are not, and the color of where you can never go. I find this blue of solitude and desire echoed within the intentions and motivations in the artist's voice here at this exhibition. And while the blue here may not exist from the desire to re-look at reality, maybe as one does in a dream villa world, it makes us deeply aware of the separation coded within the landscape, both physically and psychologically. The integration of multiple mediums that speak of nationhood and identity, such as the old cartographic maps, images of objects, objects that are marking an identity, asserting its life beyond just memory. They stand firmly in the questions that Dilpreet is asking around refugee identity. I have to admit, I do desire to hear and see and read the words of those who are addressed in the work here, and their physical absence makes me imagine what these encounters might have been like for Dilpreet as well. There are intimacies that emerge between conversations that are privy to the artist and their work, and what we see here on the walls around us are not only the fragments of those conversations with the voices of those whom she's spoken to, but maybe her own pauses and reflections as she assimilated these encounters. By allowing us to imagine from beyond the works, the landscape is no longer an absolute. The border in these maps no longer a defined line separating people, but allowing us to see spaces where identities exist within the murky boundaries of memory and nationhood. There is no singular reality, but multiple facets of everyday questions that inform this reality. And I think it was with this that, this was there were maybe more questions than resolutions that remained with me as I saw the works. And I think one of the questions, I'm going to kind of just go straight into this, Dilpreet. I think one of the questions that came to my mind when I was thinking about all these ideas is, I was also very curious to know what kind of a mind space you were in when you chose to pick up a subject like this. And it is something that is very complex and layered in its own understanding, and identity, I think, is a constant inquiry for many artists, works and processes. But I'm truly interested in like what was going on within you at that stage to want to work on this idea and to pick it up for your project?
Yeah. Thank you, Anshika, for that question. Thank you, Adwaita, Vikram, and the entire team of BIC for facilitating this exhibition. It has been indeed an enriching experience to have the third iteration of this exhibit. We had previous 2 exhibits of the same work at Simuk Center in New Delhi and Chilla Shantiniketan. So third time we have played with the visual display. So thank you for all the help, Adwaita and Vikram. And I would like to thank ICAAD, which funded this project. And of course, thank you, Anshika, for coming and joining us in the panel, and Manan for tediously working on the display and the curation. To answer your question, Anshika, I have a rather long reply to that. I had done an essay on Margaret Bourke-White. She had published a photo essay named The Great Migration, 5 Million Indians Flee for Their Lives, which was published in Life magazine in 1946. And I had written that piece somewhere in 2012. The essay critiqued the visual imagery of the event of 1947 partition and the captions which were there along with the images. And quite many years later, I was again commissioned to write a piece on the representation of Rohingya refugees. And while writing that piece, I realized that whatever material I had to work with, one of the photo essays were by Kevin Fryer, who had published 12 to 15 images of Rohingya refugees migrating from Myanmar to Dhaka. And surprisingly, if not surprisingly, shockingly for me, the visual representation, how Margaret Bourke-White had captured the refugees in 1947 to the representation of refugees by Kevin Fryer, the visual language has not changed. We had the close shots of the refugees, the faces, the intrusion of the cameras, long shots, top shots. And somehow I had to complete the commissioned essays on the representation of refugees, so I completed it and I showed it to 2 of my closest of friends and my sister as well, who is here. And she said that, and my friend said that, you know, you write well, that's perfectly fine. But what actually this essay is doing to the refugees and the community itself, they are not going to read it. The essay is going to get published in a very expensive book and very limited audience can buy that book. So you are writing it for a very niche kind of audience, not for the community for which you are actually speaking. And this thought stayed with me. And I was like, okay, fine, since the visual representation has remained the same over the years and we have photojournalists who are working with the same kind of imagery style, if I would like to put myself in the foot of an artist, what would I do? How would I like to see the representation of the refugees, which would not be similar to just the portraits and just how they are being displayed in a destitute situation. And I wanted to do something where it would be a sort of a thought process for the viewer, that they get something to think about. There would be food for thought for them as well. And so this was the mind space I was in when I had initiated this idea, that what kind of representation I would like to see of the refugees. So that was the starting point. I actually did not get a chance to work on the entire series, but this was the initial thought that if I would like to do something, it would not be just digital images, black and white, or that kind of conditions showing the miserable conditions. So yeah, so that was the mind space that led me to work on this, at least initiate that idea that I can also be making the photograph rather just writing about the photograph.
Right. And I mean, maybe we can address this again in the conversation also, but I think one of the other things when I was thinking around, I mean, of course, what you've said in terms of what does it mean to document, and it's an interesting question, I think, within the practice of photography itself to ask, whose purpose is the photograph serving, and who does it seek to address in its own language. Of course, a lot of what you've described are, I guess, news and journalistic reportage on the issues, and they are thankfully more debates around the ethics of that, the practice around photojournalism, and the afterlife of the image in that context that are coming up. It's interesting that you chose a completely different direction, and I'd like to, delve into that more. It's also an interesting time for you to have chosen something like looking at refugee migration, and I know that mentally, in your mindscape, there were other concerns that were kind of finding a marriage of their own with this idea as well, and I was wondering if in the sense of mindscape, were there questions around refugee identity that led into the project, or was it more specifics around the representation of that led into that work?
I would say it was both, because you cannot work on this kind of project, making this demarcation of the refugee identity and the representation. And to add to that, when I was thinking to work on this project, there were protests against Citizenship Amendment Act as well, and which actually pushed me to bring this entire initial thoughts into a reality. So as a minority, I felt if I have to show the solidarity towards another community which has been barred from entering our so-called secular and democratic country of India, which has a long history of assimilating and inviting the minorities across the world. So that is something which actually prompted me to work on this project, and that is how the two of the things what you mentioned about the refugee identity and the representation were culminated in this project. Right. And these are contemporary refugees. I have not taken the refugees or the family history of family history of
migration.
Yeah, the history of families who have migrated during the 1947. That is why the 2019 CAA protest actually prompted me, not just prompted me, it actually pushed me to work on the project and talk about the refugees, Tibetan, Rohingya, and Afghanis. We already have quite many documentation in terms of text, literature, and photographs when it comes to refugee representation of 1947 Indian partition. But I wanted to know what has over the years not just changed, but how we have remained almost similar in the nation when it comes to sectarian boundaries. So that was actually where the two ideas culminated, and it actually led me to produce these 36 works.
That's really, it's really nice to get a little glimpse into that, and maybe later in the conversation we can delve deeper into that. You were talking about this process of saying the whole idea in some ways started from research. It started from you questioning what you were looking at in photography because you were writing an essay on specific ideas. And I know that up until now, it seems, that had been your primary mode of, practice, where it was research, it was text, and even I think to arrive at this visual, the process itself has been very much engaged with looking at archives, looking at different kinds of maps, looking at different histories, doing interviews, having conversations. So it's interesting that the final manifestation is very visual. It's very photographic, right? And I think my question to you is that because your primary medium of practice is text-based, I'm curious to know what kind of limitations or what kind of freedoms do you feel working with the visual language allowed you within this project, but also one is, of course, in the literal sense, but one is looking at the visual language as a medium that has very deep interpretative power, right? Like, so what kind of aspect of not being maybe very literal helped you when you're dealing with images, with different alternative printing processes, with photography, and I believe there's sound that's also there in part of this research, right?
Yeah, that's a long question.
Yes, that's multiple questions, maybe.
Multiple questions, almost 3. Yes, I would not call myself an artist. Like, even if I worked on the series, I'm very reluctant because I don't have a body of work which would actually, because I have worked over the years, I can say that over the period of a decade or so, I have worked with so many texts, I have written so many essays, so I'm very confident of myself when I call myself an editor or a researcher, because I see that I have a body of work on that side of spectrum, but on another side, I'm very reluctant to, actually say that, okay, fine, I have created this 36 works, but I cannot be an artist. So this visual and this entire display comes across. And I critique so many works around me. So when I had done this thing, it has its own limitation and not freedom, but I was more at a space where I had a liberty to work on a kind of a visual language or a visual narration where I did not have to expect from the other person or an artist like what I would like to see if I am the viewer. So here I was somebody who would take that liberty and would like the viewer to, or the audience to see a certain kind of representation where they would have some kind of, not liberty, but they can spend some time with the works and see what all is happening around it. Because when you see, these are not 36 individual works, they are like speaking to each other. And I would always like, whenever we have discussed about the curation or the display, that has been the more of an idea that I want each work to stand as an individual, but they should speak to each other as well, so that you get a holistic picture of what exactly is happening with the maps, with the blues and whites. But to answer your question about the limitation, these are just...
I mean, they don't have to be only limitations. You could say that it was just freeing and that's...
No,
totally
I do feel they are limitations because later I realized when I have been asked so many times, oh, you have produced 36 works and how many years did it take you? And it took me close to 3 years to actually meet the refugees, have the conversation, get everything documented. And it was tiresome process. In between, I would lose the enthusiasm to actually work on the series. So after producing 36 works, I realized that there are so many stories, so many refugees, so many research areas, and so many geographical locations which I could not cover. So even if all these works are speaking to each other in some way, but I do feel there are certain voices, there are certain stories, anecdotes, personal, subjective histories which could not be documented. For instance, Rohingya refugees has the largest population in West Bengal, at the borders of Assam and West Bengal. I could not go over there because I had my limitations of funding, of time, because I'm a full-time editor and a researcher. This is something I did as a sort of an exercise where I can find time over the week and I can visit the camps, etc., etc. So yeah, so in that terms, I do feel that the project has a limitation and there's so many refugees living currently over here. I wish I had all the means to meet those refugees, visit those research areas, take those journeys to all the remotest of the places and try to capture those kind of voices. And I'm sure meeting different people would bring out different stories to the entire project as well. And regarding the freedom part, as I mentioned, as I said it before, that here, it was not a freedom, but it was an opportunity for me to nudge the viewer to see the representation under a new light. Because we have been saturated with one kind of visual so much that what Susan Sontag has called that there is a saturation of pain and suffering after seeing same kind of visual again and again. So here it was a chance for them to actually see the works, have a conversation around the objects, what kind of memory it prompts them, look at the archival maps and the archival maps, how the boundaries were created. So that was it wasn't a freedom, it was an opportunity for me to let the viewer have some kind of time to actually spend within these works. So that was the opportunity I took on. And
I'm going to digress maybe just slightly from the question that I had, just because you mentioned this whole idea of, you know, in an ideal world when you will have all the funds possible and we are all living in a very utopic artistic cycle around our practices, what is it that you are hoping meeting multiple or visiting and researching in different campsites or having conversations with different people who have crossed the border for various reasons, let's say. What do you think what would be your inquiry with them? In the sense that, and do you think that might then lead to more experiments? I mean, it made me think of a different question altogether, which we haven't spoken about, but like the maps have come in, the photographs have come in, because maybe photography was also how you started thinking about, what does visual representation mean, and then different processes came in. Was that the result of conversations you were having with these people that made you think of, okay, I want to bring this element into the work? And do you think that expansion can maybe then change the format from right now to something else also?
That would
It's
need
a hypothetical.
It's a hypothetical
But
situation. I
I'm
cannot
curious.
think of myself of taking that journey again.
Okay.
Yeah, even if I have the means, not the means, if I have the time. Means is a
Right.
secondary thing. I mean, you can find the means and the funds. That's like always secondary. I do not believe in that. If I have all the time in the world, if I can visit the places, I don't know about that. What change it would bring, but I'm fond of this visual language, how it has come up with, but there would be more stories, more anecdotes, and in terms of as part of the exhibition itself, yeah, so there would be more text to it maybe, and I would have more soundscape, because this exhibition is not juxtaposed, but it's complemented with the soundscape as well. And one of the things of doing the soundscape was that the audience would get a chance to relive that environment where refugees have been living. So maybe the element of soundscape would have more intense and denser element to it. It would have more layers to it, where people, when listening to the soundscape, they can be part of that entire environment. But in terms of expanding the visual language or what kind of other elements would come into the project, I have no idea right now.
Okay. Manan, I know you've been silent with us, but I know that you've known Dilpreet both in the capacity of the artist whose work you're curating, but also within Take.
Yes.
So.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this morning. If I may call so, I'm a late night person, but so just a comment. You mentioned that when Anshika asked you about the limitations, and you mentioned there are not enough means, and also there is not enough time. But I don't see that as a limitation, because that's, as you said, we don't live in an ideal world where we will have all of this at our disposal. Otherwise, because you are not producing these works because you are earning money out of it, right? You're not doing it for fame, right? All of that. But you're doing it because there is an acknowledgement to the suffering of one community, right? And since that is the thought, that is what you're doing. So I don't see time and all of that as a limitation at all. So yeah. But coming to my first question, what I would want to audience to know is that you have used archival maps. I wanted to know that why is there archival maps being used? Rather, you could have just used the current contemporary political maps and imposed the same images there. But why archival maps?
These archival maps have been collected over the years during my fellowship at Columbia University. And during the time of my fellowship, which was called Alliance of Historical Dialogue, and there it was a special emphasis how the cartographic boundaries are made and how the memories are particularly, if not linked to the nation-making boundaries, they are very much part of how when the boundaries and the borders change, which is a political reality, and memories, which is a lived reality, both of the aspects, personal and the political change. The original, the archival maps, all of these are from 19th century or 18th century. They show the original landmass. And when I overlap with the objects, it tried to create a sort of a conversation between two kinds of histories from where we come. Those fault lines which were made in the 20th century, modernist 20th century, has resulted into this kind of migration and refugee crisis which we see in the contemporary world. So when I try to use the archival maps, it sort of gives a view from, it sort of gives a chance to the viewer to travel back to the land masses where what has been and what it is right now. And so these overlaps, moreover, sort of create that conversation between personal and the political. So that's why I thought that archival maps could do justice to the political history of the South Asia, since we have experienced so many kind of border making and which are constantly shifting as we speak as well. So that's how the archival maps adds to the element of the, not just the visual language, but sort of a thought to the entire composition of the photograph.
Yeah. I've known you as a writer, and we have been working together, and we have had these intense, heated discussions where, you know, you are writing perhaps on somebody's work, you are a hardcore critic, okay, there is no doubt to that. You go all guns blazing when it comes to critiquing somebody's work. And that has happened because you write, you are a writer, and now you find yourself in a position where you are an artist. How do you critique your own work is one, and second, is there a conflict of interest? Because as a writer, you have this tendency, as an editor, you have this tendency where you will be always this very critical about what a particular artist has done. Say, for example, even if it's an intentional effort by an artist to do something in his work, you will have a critique on it, this shouldn't have been this way, or maybe something else. But now that you are in that position, how did you deal with that conflict of interest, if there was any?
It wasn't a conflict of interest, but I would say that not critique, but one what you have mentioned about the limitation and everything. And since I would not deny, I have very strong interest towards words and text. I could not see myself without writing. If somebody asks, okay, if you're talking about this, what is the thing that you would do about it? I was like, I'll write about it. I don't know how many readers would read, or what kind of audience it would be. So I would say when this entire series was done and it was displayed first time at Simurg, and I realized, though it was a conscious effort not to put the words, but I realized as a writer and a researcher who has worked with text for so many years, there should have been some kind of word around it. But that was also a sort of opportunity for me to see photograph speak for itself. It wasn't something where, we always, that photographs are always sort of juxtaposed with the words, and photographs are always seen with the limitation that they cannot speak for itself. You need to have some kind of word around it to, disseminate its meaning in its entirety. So when I had seen the works, I realized that words should have been there in case, if I claim myself that I'm really fond of words. So to translate that sort of thought and idea, if there could not be a written word, I thought it would be nice to have spoken word. So that's how I got the soundscape with that. They are sounds, but they are words as well. But those are not written words, those are spoken words. So that's how I thought that I can at least bring some kind of elements of text or the words to the entire exhibition. That's how I critiqued my work, or that's how I saw that it could be sort of bringing in what I really like to work about. Correct. So yeah.
So were you recording sound right from the beginning? Like, was that intentional, or was it as you were assimilating? I mean, we know we're looking at 36 images, but we know that you didn't have only, material for only 36. So there were a lot more, and as you were assimilating down to 36, did you at that point say, maybe I should bring in sound, or was that something that you knew right from the beginning?
Well, to answer your question, I had seen an installation by Bani Abidi in 2020. She had a sound installation. Sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the title of the work, but she talks about the... yeah, I'm sorry. But she had a sound installation where she talks about the letters which were written by the soldiers of First World War, the Indian soldiers, and they have written letters to their beloved ones in India. And she had that entire, there was text letters printed on the sunboard, and there was sound also playing. The women singers, Punjabi women singers, were singing those poems, those letters in Punjabi. And that sound installation stayed with me for the longest period of time. And I was like, whenever, I mean, it's very rare, I would say, that having worked with the art world, we see so many images, so many visuals, so different kind of art mediums, art expression, but there are very few which stay with you for the longest period of time. And it was at a very small and intimate place that sound installation was done. And I thought, while listening, I took a sort of a round of that entire installation, maybe twice or thrice. And I was completely immersed in that entire sound installation, how it haunts you. And at that moment, I said it to myself that even if at remotest of chance, even if I produce an artwork, it would definitely have a soundscape. I will have some kind of sound element to it that whenever viewers are looking at the work, they will listen to that sound, and it might just, move them as this sound installation has moved me. And yeah, whenever I used to visit those camps or meet the refugees, I would organically just record something, because it used to be an interesting campsite. There were so many, very peculiar activities happening. It's a kind of a world within a world. So, I would get a chance to visit the camps on a rainy day, on a gusty, windy night. So all of those, I would like it, this element, even if I capture it for a minute or so. I never thought that I would actually complement it. It was just during when I had thought that there is no text, and then I went back to my phone and there were recordings, all of that I've done. So
that is the later intervention when you thought that you should complement the works with the text.
That was...
Then once you realized that we're not going to put the text...
During Simurg, before, a week or so, I realized that it would be nice, and I had that Bani Abedi's sound installation in my mind. So, it was just, it wasn't a conscious effort during that time also when I was recording but it stayed with me, and it was just like, okay, fine, this is a nice... Rain would sound very differently in a campsite. It's not something which, when we are living in these brick walls, but in the campsite where you have the shacks and those makeshift houses under which they live, the rain, the sound of the water and the raindrops, it's very different. And how those raindrops and the rain would change the entire setting of the camp. So that is one of the things which I thought that it would be nice to just have a small recording of it. And especially when I visited Jammu and Kashmir, those campsites were very different from what I had seen in Delhi. Over there, the entire camp would sort of come into a new life when in the evenings they would have their own market, and there would be a conversation that, for how much should we buy this hilsa. Not hilsa, but hilsa is not available in Jammu though. The fish which is available there. And when I went to Kashmir, the azan would play at the remotest of the mountain, but the entire community would sit up to make the prayer in the evenings. So these small elements which I thought that I did not made a conscious effort when I was recording it, but I used to just like that entire milieu of those camps, and I was like, hey, this should be captured and maybe I can use it somewhere. And yeah.
Sorry, I'm just taking this on, but it was interesting when you mentioned that the campsites that you visit in maybe something like Delhi versus Jammu versus Kashmir, they were all different, but they also have different kind of lifetimes. Yeah. Like I'd imagine in Delhi, you mentioned, I don't know if you've mentioned it here, but when we were talking, you'd mentioned it was at Majnu Ka Tila as well, and Majnu Ka Tila is now, it's pretty much of an established neighborhood is how one kind of looks at it more. I know Bangalore also, I'm not very familiar exactly where, but I know that they are settlements of Tibetans in Bangalore as well. And I'm just curious, when you go to Jammu, when you go to Kashmir, I'm imagining they are much more recently settled communities, and so the setup of how the community begins to live is also very, very different. Like in Delhi, I mean, one part of it is the landscape, which comes up in sound. I'm also just very curious to know about the people who you spoke to, because let's say when you're talking about a place like Majnu Ka Tela, there are so many generations that have now, assimilated within that neighborhood, that the nature of life or work or going to school or routine, and the sense of every day is also so different from one settlement to the other, right? And I was just wondering if maybe you could throw a little bit of light on that, and if in any way that impacted how you were approaching the people who you spoke to, what kind of shifts in conversation that might have led to.
Yeah, so Tibetan refugees have been living in Majnu Ka Tela since 1960s. Yeah, 1960s. So it's like a home to them now. It's not something they see it very differently. They have made a world for themselves where they have a school run by a Tibetan missionary. They have direct economic funding from the foundation of the Dalai Lama in Dharamshala. It's a different kind of setup altogether to what I saw in Jammu and Kashmir. And interestingly, it was very recent when I was looking at these works, maybe in Shantiniketan or somewhere, I realized that it wasn't something it actually came into my mind when I was doing this entire research project, that in Jammu and Kashmir, especially with the Rohingya refugees, the documents and the documents of national citizenship is so important to them. So while speaking to Tibetan refugees at Majnu Ka Tela, they would be always very nostalgic about their certain parts of family histories. But when I would speak to a refugee in Jammu, or for that matter in Kashmir, they would be always talking about how one single document is very important to them, that if we go back, then we need to show something that we are part of that country. I would not say in terms of infrastructure, like there is stark difference in terms of infrastructure, 60s to current. I mean, and those in Kashmir, there were just 18 families who were staying. And in Majnu Ka Tela, there are quite many, more than thousands who are living over there. And in Jammu, there were 25 or 35 families who were living over there. So the interaction and the entire conversation would be completely different to what kind of turmoils or struggles they have faced. For instance, the quote which is there in the middle of this work, I would request everybody to just read it. And it says that, whenever we are speaking about a crisis, it's too far for me, my eyesight is terrible. I can't see anything. It's just that, and I don't have that quote in front of me as well. No, I would just request everybody to read it, rather me speaking out loud. So this was said to me by a Rohingya refugee in Jammu, and it was a very shabby camp where they were living. And he mentioned that, I am speaking about my journey from one place to another, A, B to C and D. It sounds very, not systematic, but it sounds as if we had planned it, given it a very serious thought about it. But it's the journey which will stay with us for the longest period of time, and which we thought about for more than 2 or 3 years. So this kind of statement would have come from a refugee who has recently faced that kind of crisis, but not from a Tibetan refugee who has sort of found a home in Delhi itself. They have some kind of, if not hope, they have found some kind of association with the place which gives them a sense of belonging. But when you speak to a refugee, Rohingya refugee, especially in Jammu and Kashmir, it's always like, this is not our home, we have to go back. So those are the different kind of, nuances to the entire conversation, which you don't realize it while you are having that conversation, but the place plays an important role in this entire setup. And I have also truly believed in the thing that how you respond to a place, how much associated you feel with the place also defines your entire identity. So yeah, so in that terms, I feel that all these three or four, not three or four, there must be 5 or 6 camps which I visited in all together. So they would have different kind of stories and nuances and layers to it, how the place actually gives them a sense of belonging or settlement over there. I hope I've answered your question. I'm just answering, I don't know if I'm answering your question.
I think you are. I don't think these are very specifics. I think they're more things I'm wondering about, so there is no like an absolute defined response to it, because I guess that's how thoughts become, right? Like even in your own mind, they become like questions to each other after a while. And I mean, while you were talking about this, I was reminded of this one engagement that we've had at Offset. We were doing a book launch for Serena's book in Dharamshala. And the book itself is on Majnu Katila. It's, an artist who's been talking to people who've been residing within Majnu Katila for generations. And I remember in Dharamshala, we'd invited people from the community, and, we were talking about this. And what you mentioned right now, like this idea of like, I am now also from here as much as I was from Tibet, was a highly, highly contested debate that went on for hours. And I do remember, in the middle of that, because there were, of course, many, many concepts that came through, but we were talking about this, this sense of identity that becomes so important. And it becomes also the first aspect of one that is attacked the easiest by state, by powers, by giving you a refugee identity also to tell you that you're here, but you're here only for a bit, and yes, you can have access to things, but only up to this point, and so how does one then assimilate when someone says you're family, but only up to this point, And it was a very strong statement that two generations of Tibetan refugees had made, where one said that I do not need to prove to you that I am Tibetan. The fact that I am living and breathing in a different land is proof enough that I am a Tibetan. And so I do not need to pander to the systems that you have created for me to constantly assert myself. The fact that I am is enough. The fact that I will eat the food that I will eat is enough, because there was an older generation refugee in the group who was saying, we're not speaking our language anymore, we're not eating our food anymore, we're not doing our rituals anymore, and we will stop being Tibetan. And this young boy who had actually, he'd come to India as a refugee just about a few years ago, and he was in college right now, and he said, but I am Tibetan. How can you tell me that I'm going to stop being this at any point of time? This is who I am, and it kind of really, it stayed with me in a very, very deep manner. And I still get goosebumps when I think about that conversation. And when you were talking about this idea of, when we have to go back, and I think it's the complexity of generations that then begin to travel for survival, more than anything else.
As you leave places, so I was born and brought up in Kashmir, right? So whenever I am traveling or wherever I am, I'm often asked, what makes you Kashmiri? That's the exact same answer that I give, that I don't need to prove, or I don't need to have an agreement that I am a Kashmiri. On a humorous note, my nose speaks for myself being a Kashmiri, with typical feature. Yeah. Yeah, so but as you leave your home, when I came to Delhi from Kashmir 5 years back to Baroda and then to Delhi. I think there was this, which you also mentioned in one of the narrations that you were telling me about, one of the interactions that you had. One of the people said that, one of the individuals said that, they keep on speaking in their language now. When I used to live in Kashmir, I would barely speak in Kashmiri. And I would, so we have this noon chai, right? I don't like the taste. I find it's like salty tea and I don't like it. Now, ever since I am in Delhi, I make a deliberate attempt that, I will have noon chai and I will speak in Kashmiri.
And you will ask your friends also to
Yeah,
participate in that exercise.
Yes, I've fed you noon chai like so many times. Like, you don't like the taste, it's fine. We will have it. We will have it. But quickly, going back to the works, okay. What these works and this exhibition also does is creates a new visual vocabulary for the refugee crisis and how they have been seen. I would want you to speak about how you have overlapped these images on these cyanotypes. See, every frame has these images. What you have overlapped, and it is also because of that it's creating this visual imagery, visual narration. And yeah, if you could tell me more about this overlapping.
The conceptual thought
Yes.
why I overlapped the images. So to give a sort of a technical answer before I actually dive into the question why I did it, these were first, these digital images were first printed on a handmade paper, and then those cyanotypes from the negatives of the archival maps were made, and then those cyanotypes were made. Overlapping, I guess I answered it that, talking about the different time span when these objects have been traveled from one place to another. That's a contemporary time. And what we see with the archival maps, those are the sort of a slice of history of 19th and 20th century. And whenever I would speak to the refugees, whenever they would come up with some kind of object or any kind of document, it would be always, they would start with a personal anecdote, and then somehow that entire conversation would move into the complicated history of nations, how the borders were made, and how these contemporary times of complicated history has changed their personal lives as well. So to bring about that entire element of that conversation, how personal leads to the political and how personal is very much political, which I truly believe in, that you cannot dissociate personal from political. Those are two definitely imbricated and implicated terms. So that's how I thought that it would be nice to have those archival maps with the objects to give it sort of a visual metaphor to what was said during the conversation, what I truly believe in, to give it a visual language. So I thought that it would be nice to have those archival maps with the objects.
So, also when I look visually at a couple of the frames here, say for example, this frame, right? This one, I'll just quickly get up. So if you look at this frame here, right? So this is the only frame where this overlapped image seems like, it has been, if you look at the background of it, right, it seems like a setup, which is unlikely happening in rest of the visuals that we see. So I would want to know more that what is that setup about? And second, very interestingly, if you could navigate through all the works, there's one frame right over that corner, the first frame there, which says Maulvi of certificate of becoming a Maulvi. And Maulvi is a religious head preacher in a masjid. So I was also curious to know about that, because you have had these interactions with them. I haven't seen. I haven't seen a certificate like that. And I remember we were having this conversation where we were talking about the similar image, and where it comes from and what is the context of it. But again, if you would also like to share that with the audience here, then what is that certificate of becoming a Maulvi? Because that's very interesting to me. Even when I saw that first time, that was perhaps the first image, which got me curious. Okay, see, the rest of the images I may have an idea. Okay, that's a family photograph, that's a ring, that's an earring. But certificate of a Maulvi is really intruding to me. Like, what is it actually?
Yeah. So should we discuss first of this image, and then we
start
can
with this, the Thai one.
Yeah. So the image of the Thai one is actually indeed very close to me as well. I mean, each of the stories, I need to acknowledge the refugees who opened their homes and heart to let me listen to their to listen to their conversation and what all they went through. This entire project would not have been possible if they would have been reluctant about it. So this particular image which you have just spoken about the Thai one, there is this workshop for Afghani women in Khidki Extension named Silai Wala. It's run by a French woman and an Indian artisan who sorts of invite Afghani women to come to the workshop and hone their tailoring and sewing and embroidery skills, which is very much close to the Afghani women community. And there was this grandmother. I had given, I had requested the owner of the place that I would be visiting your workshop. It would be nice if you can spread a word among the community members if they can bring anything to share their story about it. And when I entered, there was just 2 women who got the stuff. And the owner, she was like, hey, I hope you are not disappointed that there are just 2 family members who have got their objects or whatever the article's personal object. I was like, no, that's perfectly fine. I mean, I am not going to insist that you should bring it. If they are willing to bring it, great. If they are a bit apprehensive about it, that's perfectly fine. So, but this particular woman, grandmother, so she, her son was killed right outside her house in Kabul, and they were supposed to, on that very same evening when he was killed, they were supposed to go and attend a wedding. And the son got the entire wardrobe ready in front of the almirah, and it had one of the tie. And after the killing, the younger brother did not want the family, any of the family members, to bring any of the stuff which would remind them of the killing of the brother. But the mother being mother, she could not resist herself, and she got this tie. And that was she had not told any of the family members until now when I had asked her to, and she had not told anybody until
got
then
the
that she
tie
got
from,
the tie.
okay. Oh.
And when I had made this request to the folks over there that, can you request it? So she said that I've got something. She was very poised and very, not just, she was hesitant to show it. And I had to overcome that. I was like, it's okay. I mean, you can, the scale, the size, the aesthetic of the object are of least important to me. You just show me whatever it is and we can initiate a conversation around it. And from her bag she was carrying, she had this tie folded in a polythene bag. And she opened it and she narrated the entire story in a very calm manner. And she said that I have not shown it to anybody until you asked me. And I was so touched. I was like...
So she had not opened
she
that
had not opened
ever
it.
since she had come to...
And it was a very subtle, serendipitous moment. While she was telling me this entire story, the younger brother had come to give the lunch to the mother, who had insisted that she should not bring any of the stuff. And she had tears in her eyes when she was narrating the story. And I had to maintain my calm because you cannot, I mean, you have to maintain a critical distance. So, and I knew, I mean, I cannot understand Farsi, but there are certain terms which you pick up, and it's not the terms, it's the emotion which you pick up when you are having such kind of conversation. And she had already mentioned that she has not mentioned it to, or she has not told anybody that she's bringing this thing. And the son had come, and he was very surprised at why my mother is crying in the workshop, where she's usually very in a jolly good mood because she's among the women community and they are doing the work which she really likes. And I sort of then I said, oh, you know, I had just come and she was telling me something about the work. No. And she immediately, you know, the tie was in front of our table and she immediately held it back. She did not want to show it to the son itself. And I was like, because at times when I was doing this entire project, there would be so many events and so many moments where I would feel that, you know, why I'm doing this exercise. Nobody has asked me to do it. It's just something I'm doing it for my personal association or for my personal things. But that moment I realized that, you know, there are certain things which are just, the universe plays, you have to do certain things around it. And she also mentioned that today when I opened that entire trunk and when I was keeping that tie in the polythene bag, it still had that fragrance of the perfume which the son was about to wear before the wedding. And it was so just moving for me. And I was like, you know, these are the very minor things which actually keep you going that you should do this project. So, yeah, besides the tie, so since we were talking in that workshop, so I was like, I always seek a formal permission. I mean, I would always put it on a table that, can I take a picture? And she was like, hey, yeah, go ahead, take it. I mean, it's perfectly fine. So this wall had all the small miniature articles which they stitch, which they sell and export.
Okay.
So I mean, to create some kind of composition around it, I hung that tie on that thread, on that string, and then I took a picture. So I was like, later if there is a possibility of showing this in an exhibition, I would narrate this story and I would talk about that, how community, how different people across the state of Delhi work together to give some kind of respite to Afghani women refugees. So that's how I thought that it would be nice to have that picture instead of having it against a blank wall.
Yeah.
It would be nice to have it against some kind of this embroidered work.
Sorry, completely going off guard. When Dilpreet says if, I'm knowing her that she had already decided that she'll bring this exhibition and she'll produce these works. So if is not happening when she says if I will ever do this kind of a thing.
अरे उस time start हो रहा था yes.
I mean, what you shared was a very, very intimate and a very strong woman. It takes a lot for someone who's carrying that kind of history to give it to a stranger, you know, even if it is for a photograph. And you mentioned that while she was breaking down, you felt that you needed to have a certain critical distance. And I'm curious to know why.
And also to add that, to follow up with that question also, is like, once you realize that, how do you draw the boundary where you do not cross a certain space, you know, where you do not feel as it should not be an intrusion to a personal space. So how do you draw that line while you are in that situation? Because somebody narrating the story is very personal. And as she said, the woman who was narrating this to you, she had never taken that tie out of the briefcase ever she has come to India. But she did it for you. And, you know, these are very personal moments that she had shared with you. Where do you define the line? Okay, you can't cross a certain point.
I think my question is, do you need to define a line? Because they have crossed the line.
Yeah, they have. But now if somebody is in a state, in a highly emotional state, I cannot be of the same state where I am also crying. Or where I am also being emotive about it. No, I get moved. I mean, I would not, as a human. No, I'm not, I'm coming to that. It's a human sensibility and it's human tendency when somebody is sharing a very intimate story. You have to be fully patient to the entire conversation, to that entire environment about it. But when I say that I draw a line, I always say, it's a complicated answer and I would just digress. Yeah, no. The thing is, you mentioned that when she would speak about the personal story and all of those things, maybe at certain point of time or with certain kind of conversations, you do not tend to share it with the closest of the people as well, because the brother and the family member said that we are not going to carry it.
Yeah.
So it gives them sort of a false sense of closure. But she needs, you can say it has happened, it must have happened with everybody. I mean, in this room, that you cannot at times share certain things with your closest of people, but you might come up and say certain things or express yourself to a stranger. And it would be a surprise to yourself as well that I have not had this sort of conversation with my my close group of friends or family members or anyone. So maybe from that front, I'm thinking when she got a chance that she can bring any of those things, so she got it. That was a sort of a moment of, if not vent, but at least say certain things which she could not have shared it because that was sort of a family pressure that you don't have to talk about it. We want to just erase that kind of memory. So when I say that I maintain a critical distance, I do not say emotionally critical distance. I say that, I have to end that conversation at some point of time. Even though I have spent entire day with one of the women's in special at Simurg, where, I cannot say, okay, oh, I have to go now, please cut down this conversation. Obviously, it can't happen. So I always try to end that conversation with a comforting word, where I try to not get too much emotionally invested. I try to be responsibly restrained. That is how I do it. Where I say that, even if you are narrating this story, you are telling me a piece of a personal, subjective history which you might not want to share it with me, but you're doing it right now. The only comfort that I can give is that there is a hope. You have survived for so many years, you will survive. Because those people, those conversations at times could be very sort of not motivated, not giving them a ray of hope to see a better life. So that's when I say that I maintain a critical distance. I do not get, this is, yeah, I don't lose, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So I have to be, that could come only if I maintain a critical distance. If I would be emotionally invested, or if I would be just, be involved with what they are going, then it would not be sort of it would not be sort of a conversation where I can say certain things which would motivate them, or some kind of, a way to look forward. Because I remember one of the conversations which I had with one of the women, I can see that picture, and she was just that, and that was the women with whom I had the entire day conversation. She just said, oh, thank you, shukriya. I just translated it in English. She was like, that thank you for coming and listening to me. I have not had this conversation for longest of time. And I was like, even if I can lend a patient ear to that conversation, that's the way to go about the project, and that's where I draw. If not, it's not a drawing a line, it's like something that where I have to push myself that I can, nowhere I can experience what they have gone through. That's not possible. That's not even remotely possible. So that's how I just sort of keep not a distance? But at least maintain that kind of space of an outsider. Yeah, because I have always been an outsider.
Yeah.
Within my community, as a minority, myself, I do not belong to my sect of circle as well. I have been always an outsider. And with them also, I'll always be an outsider. So I try to work on that and keep on that I'm not an insider.
It's clearly a very complex relationship of knowing when to give in, when to stay back. I'm just thinking out loud. I don't even know if this is a question or not. But when we then, let's say you are at Simgur, right? And the women, they're young girls also, they're women, they're like of all ages who come in. They don't know you yet, right? And yet they have chosen to bring objects, stories that stay very much alive in their lives. Did you at any point of time feel that them bringing this to you came with any kind of an expectation from you? And if it did, was there, you know what I mean? Like, that, oh, we'll tell the story and then maybe things in our life will change. Because that does happen a lot within such dynamics. And as much as you are creating a work from it, it doesn't necessarily impact the directness of their situation, right? So I'm wondering if you ever felt that they came to you with an expectation, and how do you then manage that dynamic in case it happened? Just curious of the process.
This has not been so apparent with the Afghani community at Simurg Center, but I faced this question, especially with the Rohingya refugees in Jammu, not even in Kashmir, where they would say, because it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was 2-day trip. I had very restricted time, and I was like, hey, that, I have to do this entire exercise within 2 days. So they would say that, okay, fine, if I'll share this document, what kind of change or shift you could bring to my life over here in Jammu? And I was like, if you tell me a story about it, maybe I can tell 10 people about it. Otherwise, it's very restricted. That entire story would stay within a camp or within a community. But with this document, when I'll produce this photograph and it will travel, you will have a multiple different kind of audience which would interact with the work and with your story, which is unfortunately not possible if you would not show me the document. So it's not just, in terms of monetary value, in terms of some kind of policy change, in terms of, I am, as a researcher and editor working within a space which is rooted in arts and creative field, this is what I can do. Right. Whatever means are available within my field or within my discipline, I can, do maximum out with whatever potential I have. So even if you will give me any kind of, minimal scale object or any kind of story, it will travel around. And it will sort of be an alternate history to what we have been told. That is really important. I mean, for this entire project, this is sort of creating this entire photo series is a tool of subversion. How do you look at the high political narrative? If your personal stories, whatever we read about it, we will get a quote from a refugee in the entire journalistic piece of writing. Yeah. But this kind of visual language or visual, display or any kind of representation would give you a chance for the audience to look into it and ask if, if not, yeah, and they will have their
also
own
to add
way
on
of
that, it may and may not directly impact the individual, but what it definitely does that it creates a greater impact to the entire community when we speak about it. Say, for example, when we speak about Palestine or Israel right now, right? When we speak about Palestine, there is this collective pressure we as people create. So works like these may not impact an individual very directly. The individual may not even know that there is a certain change or an individual who is maybe thinking about this issue at one particular period of time. But definitely over a period of time, in the moment of time as we speak right now, it creates that public awareness. And that awareness eventually leads to create a public opinion and create this public pressure to certain regimes and to certain governments, but it definitely does impact the community on a larger scale.
Yeah. I mean, I agree on that.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying, I just had a thought. Yeah, it's a statement, not a question. Yeah, so you have more to add, otherwise I would want to go back to Yeah, the Maulvi work is, I'll just point it out to them so that you can also speak.
Should we move if you want to?
I'll just, maybe later they can navigate through the entire display, but this is the work that I'm specifically referring to.
Yeah. So there are different kind of conversations, like what I mentioned about this piece of tie. It was a very intimate conversation, but that was that certificate of Maulvi, I had collected it from Rohingya refugee camp in Haryana, which is called Nu. And there you have makeshift camps and those shacks sort of places where they live. And the community member who was accompanying me, and we reached this place, and she was very reluctant. She was like, hey, do you really want to knock on the door and ask what they have. And I was like, why not? She was like, that this person will not be a you would not have a very pleasant conversation with him. I was like, that's okay. I mean, they're different kind of conversation. Every time I cannot expect to have a very intimate or a very personal conversation. There should be learning lesson for myself as well. I want to have different kind of experiences. So very hesitantly, she knocked on the door and the person came out and she said in her language that, this is what I'm doing and this is what I want. And he went inside and within few minutes, he got this certificate. It was like, this is what I have. And he spanked it and it fell on the ground. And then you sort of try to meander and navigate through the situation. I could definitely understand his frustration. He was like, hey, this is the certificate, this is only what I have. So I asked him, what is the certificate all about? Because I can't read Bangla, and it wasn't Bangla, it's Rakhini. And he was like, that I had learned to become a Maulvi in a masjid, and that the same masjid within few months was gutted by the Myanmar government, and the certificate has no value to me. So, you want to take a photograph, you want to take away the certificate. I do not have any, not just a time. I mean, it has no value to me. It serves no purpose. So I was like, but you're still carrying it. So even if it did not have any value, you would not have carried it all along the way. And he said that, maybe I was too attached to the entire thing that I really wanted to become a Maulvi at that time, but the situation turned murkiest, and I had to go back. And moreover, he insisted that the same place, the institute which taught me was, if it is gutted in front of my eye, I mean, how I'm supposed to, take back that entire knowledge system which I gained over it. And I just took the photograph, and if you would see, it's against the background of a brown soil. So it's on the floor. So I did not want to pick it up and put it somewhere else to take the photograph. I was like, since this has come in such a heated moment of conversation, I would not keep it somewhere else, and I would take the photograph on the floor itself, on the ground itself. So yeah, so I just, after taking the photograph, I gave it to him. I guess he disappeared while I was taking the photograph. And then I asked my community member who was accompanying me, that please find out that person. I need to give it back to him. And she did, and I was like, you said that it has no value and I can carry it with me also, but nothing goes waste in life. You never know how this knowledge would gain you, and if you go back, or this certificate could bring something to your life, so I will not take it. And he took it back from there. He had given it to me. He was like, because I asked that, can I take a photograph? He was like, you want to take a photograph, you want to take it away, you want to tear it apart. I mean, none of my concerns, do whatever as you please. But obviously I could not take it, so I just took a photograph and I just handed over to him in a acknowledgement manner that, it's yours. In no ways I can have this, so, you have to take it, and it might be of some use in whatever remotest way.
I mean, again, I have, long ruminations that are maybe questions, maybe whatever, they want to be defined. And maybe this is for both of you to a certain degree. I mean, what was really wonderful is that the first manifestation of the work was at Simgur. It was for the people who had shared their stories. They got to come and see what that led to, what that process meant. And, sorry, one sec, right. And so in some ways I wanted to know what the response to the people is like at the exhibition.
At Simur?
Yeah. And also, Manan, you've been curating many iterations and manifestations of this work. So it might be nice to just see what that process has been. You can choose whoever wants to. You go first.
So the entire show had 3 iterations. First, we started at Simurg, and that's the same question that I asked Dilpreet, that why are we doing it at Simurg? We both work with galleries in Delhi, and if we would have insisted and wished that we should have taken it to some contemporary art gallery, it would have been an easy road. And but Dilpreet mentioned that time, it was for the community, and and it should be first displayed to that community. So therefore, Simurg was chosen. And what I felt. The difference in terms of the viewership at Simurg and how we took it to Shantiniketan in Archila and Shantiniketan and eventually at BIC, the community at Simurg, they had, of course, a personal association and inclination towards the work. So how they interacted with the work was different in a sense. It came from a very emotional quotient. Their experiences were different. However, when we introduced this exhibition to Archila or even here, the viewers are spectators, they're not part of it. At Simurg, they were very much part of the process. This exhibition would have not existed if it was not from that community. So that is how it was decided, and it was a very deliberate choice that you made that we're going to have it in Simurg. But how it eventually changed, that we also, while curating it, we also had to see how space responds to this kind of works. And all the spaces that we have worked with were spatially very different, like for all the spaces. And I have been trained as an academician in museologist and curation. We always were taught that we have to make an exhibition ideal exhibition. Now, having worked in this field and this industry, I confidently say there is nothing called ideal exhibition. That does not exist. We as curators try to make an exhibition, we try to take it too close to being an ideal exhibition, but an ideal exhibition does not exist, I believe that. And that is how the iterations kept changing. In Simurg, I think we displayed only 27 works, not the entire set of 36 because the space constraints. While as in Shantiniketan, we had added more to that, but BIC is the only place where we are exhibiting the entire work. All 36 sets, one is given to the space because this space is like that. And also we wanted to create a layout where, and Dilpreet was very clear that what kind of a layout is she looking at. Because if you look at the maps and how it has been put very clearly, it follows a pattern of these blues and whites, which creates a pattern which represents the fluidity of borders. And psychologically and curatorially speaking, when we do something like that, it makes your eye travel. It makes a visitor easy to navigate what we are trying to communicate. So that is what was done with this exhibition. But at the same time, we also wanted the works to be seen in individual forms, where a viewer has a more intimate relationship with the works, and therefore we chose to put these works individually on those walls, so that when a viewer is interacting with the works, he has that intimate, or she has that intimate relation with the works, where he can understand and see through the layers of that work. And this is the only iteration.
There's one more thing,
yeah,
which is the text.
Oh, yes.
Which you have not mentioned.
Which you insisted me to write.
I insisted that because, so 2 iterations, we did not had any text inside the exhibition space. But this time I insisted, Dilpreet, that we should write a text and we should place it inside the exhibition space. And I know Dilpreet believes that, photographs can't be complemented with the text. But why I insisted on that was while we were exhibiting at Shantiniketan, there was this one girl from MFA. And during the Q&A session, she said, Dilpreet and you will leave tomorrow. Who will tell us the story? How will we navigate through? Which was a realization that there might be 30, 20, 10 people coming to see the exhibition or more. And out of that, maybe 10 will have the understanding to read the visual or to understand the thought process or the layers. But no, I don't think more than 60% will understand the kind of work this is. So therefore, to make the works more communicable, to communicate, and I think it's also our duty as curators. I don't speak for an artist, but as a curator, I think as a curator, I need to make works accessible. I don't put works only that, we have to display it, it's coming from a thought, but to cater to the audience which does not understand or cannot read the layers of the work. I think as curator, that's what I like to do. I like to make an exhibition, make the works as communicative as I can. And therefore, that is why I insisted on the text, because if a visitor would come who is not coming from a background of visual arts, it would be entirely difficult for them to understand what are we exactly talking about. And therefore, with this text, and also I'm not intending to give them the entire information about, because I also believe there is a
spoon feed that.
yeah, I don't want to do that, because I believe the responsibility also lies on the viewers. I will take them to a certain point where I will introduce them to the thought, to the concept, but not entirely give away what exactly we want to talk about, because as viewers, I want you to interact with the work. I also want you to go away with your own understanding. So that is where text, I think, was very important.
What do you feel about the text in the show now that it is there, it is present?
It's not a direct text, it's a poem.
Okay, so that works for you.
Because poetry has its own metaphors and has its own.
No, we have the curatorial intervention, we have the artist statement.
Yeah, but that artist.
No, I think we're referring to the
Statement. That art. That artist statement, somebody told me yesterday that it gives an overview of that what the photo series is all about, but it does not give direct meaning or direct understanding of what the artworks is all about. It gives a background.
That is the intention.
Precise.
Yeah,
that's
that is the intention.
And somebody the other day, I got a call from a journalist for some story, and she was like, "Do you have captions for each of the images?" I was like, "No, there is no caption. I've already sent the information," and I said the title, the title of the series. But she insisted, "Why don't you have some sort of caption to it?" I was like, "I don't want to have a caption to it. I cannot have these, captions saying Thai or whatever. But I mean, that would defeat the purpose of doing the entire exercise. You should see the work in its entirety. It speaks to itself. It creates sort of sense of solidarity despite the geographical distances that we have." So this text, even if when you insisted, one is a quote by the Rohingya refugee and another two ones are my very remote attempt to write some kind of poetry where I do not give the direct meaning to the direct, not meaning, but complete information about the artworks, but it sort of create another layer where, people are engaged to deconstruct the words and see how it complements the artwork as well. So it wasn't like explaining the works in
And
its sense.
also with poetry, I believe that it does not belong to people who write it. It always belongs to people who read it. So therefore, that does the job, what was intended. That it takes you to a certain point and then it leaves you there where you can build your own understanding from that. So yeah, that is the idea what was with the text, and thankfully she agreed.
As if I had a choice.
I think we're a little out of time. We'll open up the space and we can have a more interactive, informal structure of the walkthrough that Manan will be right here for. To kind of close in on this segment, I guess, I think I'm again very curious to know about, I'm just because I'm a photographer, I work within photography, saying this is the end of a project is always a very, very tough negotiation. When do you think something is closed? Especially in a subject like this, where you're talking about people whose lives are continuing on, the situation continues on. I think global violence is at a different intensity. Questions of nationalism are constantly being provoked on different fronts. How do you find yourself prepared to close a work? Do you close the work or not? I guess is the bigger question. And if you don't, then where does it go from here?
Tough question, but a very pertinent one, saving best for the last. I believe there is no closure to arts. The work carries on, it has its own life. And since when you asked about the limitation part, that these are just 36 works and there are so many refugees across not just India, across the world. And as we speak, there are so many people who are displaced during the Gaza war. The question of hypernationalism and sectarian boundaries, they are being not just provoked, they are probed again and again. So when I was doing this project, I remember I mentioned it to you that when I was at, we have to thank Maze Collective, Ashish Sahu, who has given his workshop to
Great
create
expertise.
great expertise, a
And
very good friend of mine. Very special thank you to Ashish as well. Oh, how can I forget? He runs a very amazing Maze Collective in Delhi who gave his workshop to print these cyanotypes, and he was very patient. He was like, he asked me that you don't cook definitely. I was like, no, I don't bake, I do not cook. So he was like, you need to be patient when you make the cyanotypes. Yeah. So I remember when I was making those cyanotypes and I told him, or you, I mean either of you or both of you, that oh, this project has a strange timeline, that when the first day I visited the workshop, the Gaza war had unfolded. And I realized that this is so much minuscule effort that I have done. There are so many stories which need to be told. So maybe if I have a chance, it would not be a closure to this project. I will have more interaction with different kind of refugees across the globe, maybe North Africa, borders at Venezuela and Colombia, or for that matter, in Germany, in Europe.
so you want to expand this to bringing in
Yeah.
other communities
and
who
moreover,
are
that
also.
sort of conversation, that kind of inclusion would be an effort to create a thread of solidarity despite, latitudinal and longitudinal distances, which we often claim. I mean, if we are speaking about solidarity, it cannot be confined to one regional space. It has to have multiple points of registration and markers. So maybe, I mean, if I would not say there is a closure to it, it will have different kind of visual meaning or a composition around it. So let's see how it goes and how it unfolds over the years.
So you'd like to continue this
with it,
with,
and, yeah.
with bringing in more and addressing more violence that is
Yeah.
happening across
Yeah.
countries.
It's an ongoing project. I would
Right.
not say these 36.
So then we have to let go of the practicalities that you were saying could be limitations.
No, those
The
are not-
weekends between the job, the funds, all of that.
Yeah,
Then
but
it's a commitment to
Yes. I
to
mean,
these
Means
conversations.
are secondary, and time is always. I mean, it's always secondary. I mean, if there is a will, there is a way. So time and means are secondary. I need to find some kind of way to, navigate and negotiate and bring about those kind of voices included in the project.
That
So
sounds
let's see.
really.
Ambitious.
No, it sounds promising.
Oh.
It sounds something that I think we need to do in a time like right now, is to push ourselves outside of spaces that give comfort. Just because we're not in a time that's about comfortable spaces. It's about being in times where we can push, we can provoke, we can question, we can resist.
Yeah.
So that sounds more welcoming.
To add to that, work is not only often closed or put to an end by an artist or people who are involved with that, but also it is taken forward by the viewers, I believe also. What Dilpreet from her end can do, she can produce more, she can have different iterations of it, she can produce a text out of it, maybe a book out of it. That is one role as somebody who has produced the work. But the responsibility is also on the reviewers, especially the works which are acknowledging a community, the struggle that they're going through. The responsibility also lies on the viewers to take the work forward, and not in terms of producing works, but at times even speaking about certain communities and the work that she has produced, because it's talking about a certain struggle, a certain community. That is also another way how a visitor takes the work along and forward. So there is no closure to this kind of work. I mean, I would say there is a closure to many works. I do not believe in the statement that, the work of art does not have a closure. I think some works do have, some have, some should have, yes.
But not of this
Yes.
kind.
But
this should
this kind
be
of work,
ongoing.
yeah.
I think my question was not about the life of the work. My question was about where does the work go from the artist? Does she consider her process at a point of closure, or does she consider her process at a start?
Okay.
Yeah. You're quite at the start, it seems.
It's quite a start. It's quite a start. So should we start with the curatorial walkthrough? How should we go?
No, I think we worked. I mean, because we all intended to have this curatorial walkthrough as part of the conversation, we have touched upon a lot of things. But I quickly, for those who have joined us late, when we talk about the iterations of this display in BIC, of course, all the spaces will have its own limitations. And as I said, no space is an ideal space. So when we look at the curatorial intent of this work, now this work is not produced simply because of a creative labor of art. This is an acknowledgement to a community and to the struggle that they have been going through. When we look at the display, it creates this pattern of map and ebbs and flows. It creates the pattern of these, creates the pattern through the map of these ebbs and flows, which also represents the fluidity of borders. And when we see the patterns of blues and whites, how they play with it, as I already mentioned, it creates a visual narration and helps an eye to travel and navigate through what is intended through the curatorial perspective. And once we do that, we also need a viewer to acknowledge and understand and create a relationship with the work where he is able to penetrate into the different nuances and different layers of the work, which is done through the works that have been produced, that have been hung there individually, and on the wall that is on back. So,
Yeah. But any questions? Okay. Yeah. Oh, sure. Okay.
okay.